The rest of us, open our Bibles, 1 Samuel chapter 18. We've been doing this series on David. This is week number 2. All sorts of things about David's life. I'll just get right to it today. We're going to talk about envy, something none of you have ever experienced. You're going to have to think of people you know who've experienced this, but it certainly has never been you, never will be you either, right? That's saying you don't have envy in your life or you'll never be envious is kind of like trying to say, I'm never going to have a cold. Eventually it's going to get you in one way or another. So even if envy isn't a current issue, current experience going on in your heart right now, listen, because God's Word can show you some things that when it comes along, when it creeps up, you can look at God's Word and see how you can deal with it. Because we often kind of intermix the words jealousy and envy. And I think it's okay to do that at times, and yet at the same time, when I read the Bible, I think sometimes they're kind of interchangeable, and then other times they're definitely two distinct emotions, two distinct attitudes that we have. Jealousy says, there's something I don't have that I want. But envy is the big brother to jealousy. Envy is twice as ugly as jealousy, 4 times stronger, and will beat you up 10 times as bad when you have envy going on in your life. Envy is a powerful, nasty attitude, not just an emotion, it's an attitude that we have, and we need to address it. We need to be ready to fight it off because ugly things come from envy. There's nobody who you look at their life and you say, wow, what a beautiful human being they have become, and they say, what's your secret? Oh, I'm just full of envy. No one's going to tell you that's the secret to being such a wonderful, warm human being. It just wreaks havoc in our lives, and we're going to talk about that. In fact, there's a story here, 1 Samuel 18, where the story starts off like this. It says, whatever mission Saul is the king. David, he's been anointed king, but he isn't the king yet. He's the king elect, we could say in our terms here. But he's working for Saul, King Saul. And he says, whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. Now remember, we had said last week, one of Saul's shortcomings is that what people said and what people thought of him mattered a lot. It mattered too much. Now listen, we all prefer people to think nice of us. We all prefer people to admire us and appreciate us. We all do. But many of us have an ability to take it to an unhealthy level. Saul really did that. And this little hint here, this pleased all the troops and Saul's officers. Well, Saul's like, ooh, I made a good move. Then this happens. It said, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, Goliath, said, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, very customary, very cultural to have happen here, with joyful songs, with timbrels and lyres. And it says, as they dance, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. What? We're just a couple more verses here, but let me just point out something that culturally is going on here. In Hebrew poetry, if you're going to give one valuation to one thing, the next valuation, just by the rules of poetry in Hebrew, the next valuation you give will be one order higher. That's just the rules of Hebrew poetry that's going on here. So thousands for Saul, the rules of Hebrew poetry, we're going to attribute tens of thousands to David. So knowing that, and obviously he's just come back from killing Goliath. Now, Goliath died, and then all the Philistine army that was standing a few yards behind him, they turned and ran. Yes, the Israelite army went after him, attacked him, wiped them out. But to say, obviously, it's kind of a euphemism here that's going on when they say this. This is his first battle. Here, the point that's really being made here is Saul's great, David's awesome. Saul's pretty good, we appreciate him, we love David. So that's really what's going on with this here. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him. They've credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? goes, this keeps going, I'm going to lose my job. He's probably not really aware of David being anointed to be the next king anyways. But he's, kings in this area of the world, that, there was always this fear, always this concern of someone usurping your authority and taking over your kingdom. And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. You continue, I encourage you later today, you do some Bible reading and read the rest of chapter 18, chapter 19, and you see how envy just grows up inside Saul and consumes him. I almost think that he would be unrecognizable even. I think it would have been something that even just took over his appearance after a while. It just poisoned him so much. Well, I looked up some definitions of envy. Here's some of them. Envy is the state of desiring something that someone else possesses. It's a vicious emotion that can crush self-esteem, inspire efforts to undermine others' successes, or even cause people to lash out violently. It also feels just terrible. Here's another one. It says, envy is the art of counting other people's blessings instead of your own. And I said earlier, jealousy is one thing, but envy is the ugly big brother to jealousy there. Envy isn't happy unless it can beat you down. And it will do it every chance it gets. Now, at times, with your envy, we say things and we do things that are lashing out to the one we are envious of. And sometimes we redirect it to other people in our envy, and we lash out to them also. But the truth of the matter is that when envy is active, when it's awake and going on in our thoughts and our minds, we are always actually lashing out at ourselves. We may not realize it, but we are. So I want to talk to you about 3 things about envy from this here today. The first one is just this, the bait of envy. And there is a bait to envy. If you think jealousy can be a big deal in someone's life, I tell you what, you got to buckle up, because envy will take you 100 miles an hour faster. And I gave you some definitions earlier, but let me just drill down one little bit more on what envy is. Jealousy, again, is you want what someone has. But envy is someone has something you want. Not only that, but they have something that you believe you deserve to, and you hate them for it. You despise them. Now, we're practiced Christians, so we're not allowed to hate. We just come up with other terms in our minds, like I don't really like, I love them, but I don't like them. We'll come up with excusing language like that, but envy was even there in the Garden of Eden. That's the very thing that Satan used as a tool to get Adam and Eve to sin, to disobey God, to eat the forbidden fruit that God had told them not to eat there. Is that Satan tempted them by introducing envy into their heart as a legitimate thought they could have against God. He told them that they would be justified to be envious of what God had. And listen, God knows you eat that fruit, you'll be just like him. He doesn't want you to be like him. And suddenly in their heart, yeah, I want to be like him. Why can't I be like him? All I have to do is eat the fruit and I can be like him, but he doesn't want me to. He's trying to keep me from having that. Why, and they're like, I want to be like him. And now, granted, it only had a growth period of a few minutes. I mean, we can all think of individuals or even ourselves where envy had days, weeks, months, years to grow, and then what it turned into. But it was envy right there. Satan deceived them into believing that they could be just like God. Adam and Eve became envious, and they wanted to be like God, so they ate the fruit. The bait of envy is convince you that your life is lesser because you don't have something that somebody else does. The bait of envy is that also you really don't like them either for that. It's deeper. Envy is always tied to a person. It's not just that you envy the thing they have, it's you envy them. And then you start not liking them. If you envy that person who has the thing you want, you see, especially when you see them enjoying the thing that you want. Well, I want to enjoy that too. In fact, if I have what they have, I bet I would enjoy it better than they enjoy it. I bet I would treat it better than what they treat it. It kind of looks like they take it for granted. I would never take it for granted. I'd be so grateful to have that. And I just see how they treat what they have that I don't have, that I want. I said, they're terrible. I mean, I would never be like, Jealousy says, my life is not complete. My life is not fulfilled until I have what someone else has. But envy takes that and directs it right at that person. Like, I don't even like you for having it, for what you have there. And there's lots of ways you can tell that you have envy. Is that one of the ways that here's the other thing about envy. It's not very often in the midst of having a bout of envy that you're aware of it. It's where your friend or your spouse say, what's your problem? Oh, I'm just full of envy right now. Because that's not cool to admit. But it's also one of those things we're kind of blind to. And I'll get to why here in just a moment. But, when one of the ways that's kind of a tell that we've got some envy going on in our life about something that someone has and we don't even like them for having it, is when something goes wrong in their life, and you may not even say it out loud, but inside you're a little bit happy. Someone's got the marriage that you wish you have, and you see that, they're going through a rough stretch. You're like, about time they have, you see somebody who, they've got some health that you don't, and you see them struggle, like, about time. Kind of good, You see things going great for them, always at work and all that, and then something happens and they get embarrassed in front of the whole company because it didn't go right. You're like, good. Welcome to reality. When we have a little bit of joy about someone who we're envious of, a little bit of joy of them experiencing something rough or unfortunate, that's a big tell in our hearts that we're envious of them. We're taking joy in that. Now, here's one of the things about envy. Envy cries out, it's not fair. It's not fair that they've got that. It's not fair that I don't have that. I deserve it too. Envy gets its roots, and it falsely does it. It's a delusion. It's a lie all the way. But it falsely gets its foundation in justice. See, justice is something that's wired into the fabric of all of us. When something unfair happens, because justice is getting just what you deserve. And when somebody escapes justice, and that can be good or bad, if someone justly deserved to have good happen to them, and they didn't. The big reward for solving the crime goes to somebody who didn't solve the crime, and there's the guy who did. Like, hey, give him the reward. We feel that's injustice. So it's that idea that things should be fair, things should be right. Our hearts clamor for justice. There's hardly anything that drives us to action more than when we witness injustice, even when we hear it about someone else. Susan was telling me a news story she read just this week about just a horrible, terrible story. I don't even know what part of the country it was in, but some 11-year-old boy who, because of bullying, took his own life. And here's where the justice part, it just kicks in. I don't even know him. I don't know the school. I don't know the town or the city or the state. But it's just that this is the fabric that's just so hardwired into all of us about justice, is that the parents had talked to the school. And the school hadn't done anything about this bully. They just let it keep going. And they're like, somebody needs to do something about that bully. It just rises up in you. Let's not stop until there's justice, because they show pictures, handsome, wonderful young man, gone. It's just that thing. It doesn't take much for any of us to hear that. See, envy though, it masquerades as righteous indignation. It's masquerading that. Why don't I have a marriage like she does? Why didn't I get a wife like he did? Why can they eat whatever they want and I just walk by a bag of potato chips and I gain weight? I hate how things are so easy for them and hard for me. It's not fair. I wish it were easier for me too. I had a fascinating conversation once with a mom who, not even in this state, somewhere else in the country, but two of her children, boys, born very much with autism. Very difficult for these boys even to communicate verbally and the like. And we're having a conversation once, and she was always just an honest person. And she said, she was talking about what other, inevitably you can have people say things to you that they may not intend it to be, but it does come across as insensitive. And the feelings that a parent struggles with who has children, in her case too, with disability, and just the workload that it is in doing that. She says so often she wants to say to them, "Oh, you and your kids. Oh, you got the off-the-rack kids." What does she mean by that? Just the kids that, oh, you know what? It's just a carbon copy. There's no flaws. There's no defects. You can just go to the rack, pull one off, and it's just fine. You got an off-the-rack kid. My kids got given to me from the secondhand store. And I don't mean she's going that far, but I'm just continuing with the analogy. There's the flaws. There's the defects there. And I am not judging her one iota, but I can't help but wonder, and I think I would certainly battle it, of envy. Get to see your kids progress and develop, grow in things. My kid has been at the same thing for 8 years. You get milestones with your kid. I don't get nothing. Envy just says that, it's not fair. And I agree, in that case, it ain't fair. And we'll talk about how we deal with that here in a minute, but we need to be aware of the bait of envy that says it's not fair. Now, here's another thing about it is I had a verse for that, but we'll move on. The destruction of envy. See, the destruction of envy is once Saul started having his envy of David's popularity being greater than his own, you can plainly see that he just starts sinking lower and lower into misery there. His envy turned him into this ugly, rotten, angry-ridden man that he was. His envy made him paranoid and untrusting. You look there at that last verse of the passage, and from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. That statement, in fact, as you read on in the story, just becomes an absolute understatement. He became obsessed with David. He started using his entire army to hunt him down, to kill him. He was so obsessed by it. It eventually took such a large place in his heart and his mind that, here's part of the destruction of it, it became this massive wedge between him and his son Jonathan. Him and his son Jonathan were so close that the Bible tells us that at one point that Saul, as king, he didn't do any big move. He didn't make any big decisions without sitting down and saying, "Hey, what do you think about it? Here's what's going on," and talking it through with his son. That's close. That's a great bond. That's a great father-son bond that's going on there. But at some point in there, Saul is so obsessed with his hate and his envy of David's popularity, it drives a wedge even between him and his son. Finally, it just grew that large. Two things later that we have King Solomon who... I'm reading my writing wrong. 2 kings later, we have King Solomon, who's king. And King Solomon, David ends up becoming king. Solomon was his son. King Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs that we have today. And I have no doubt in my mind that Solomon, as he grew up as a boy, he heard all the stories about dad and his upbringing and his conflicts with King Saul and all the things that went on. And in the book of Proverbs, Solomon wrote this in Proverbs 14:30. He says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Envy rots the bones. Of course, it doesn't mean literally that's going on there. It's a figure of speech, and we've got kind of a slightly similar figure of speech that we use today. We say, you're outside too long in the cold, you come in and you can't get warm. We say, "Oh, I'm chilled to the bone." What are we implying when we say that? It's figure of speech, but what are we implying? We're saying, man, I am cold to the core. I mean, it's deep in me, this cold that's going on in me. And he's saying here that envy rots the bones. Envy gets down to the core of who we are. It goes down into all the deep spots of who you are as a person. And it doesn't just sit there. It doesn't just reside there. We've all become scientists and experts in the last 2 years because of COVID, haven't we? We've all earned a degree, and all the stuff that we've heard like that. One of the things we've learned about antibodies, not just COVID antibodies, just antibodies, is that they, where are they at? Well, antibodies go to your bone marrow. They go right down to there, and they just hang out there until the bell rings and your body says, hey, we really could use you right now, come on out. They go right down to the bone marrow, the core, the bones, the deep part of your bones there. But here, when we harbor envy in our hearts, it starts destroying us. It starts working on us. Even though antibodies might just sit there, you don't know they're there. In fact, they're kind of just hanging out. They're not doing anything. But envy doesn't do that when it gets down to the deepest part of us. It doesn't just hang out. It doesn't just do nothing. It rots. It's always working away at us. When we have envy, we can't compartmentalize it. We can't just, in our hearts and in our minds, maybe if we even have some slight awareness of what's going on in us, we can't just put it in a box in our hearts and just say, stay over there and don't touch anything else. Stay over there and don't spill into my marriage. Don't spill into my relationship with my kids. Just stay over there. Don't show yourself at work. And all like that. We have no ability to compartmentalize envy because envy can't be controlled by us. We shouldn't fool ourselves that it won't, because don't think that you're different in this area. Envy is so powerful and so strong, nobody can control it. Only God can. No amount of willpower will keep you from taking and projecting a little or a lot of the negative feelings onto others. It comes out. It gets shown in some way. Eventually, you cannot keep it out of your other relationships. Saul envied David, and eventually it grew so bad that it affected his love and his trust of his son. Envy works its way into every part of our lives. Envy rots the bones. Eventually, at some point, Saul, his envy grew so big in his heart, there was a confrontation at a banquet one night between him and his son. And Saul it's a celebration banquet. And Saul grabs a spear and hurls it at his son at the banquet. This is just the envy. It's grown so much, it can't be contained in any box that he would try and have in his heart. Even the Apostle James recognized that this is why relationships were being destroyed amongst people who used to be friends. Because he says this in James chapter 4. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? He says, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet. Can you imagine writing to that church? I'm glad I'm not pastoring that church. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. He's saying, look at all your friendships, all your relationships. They're getting destroyed here because of the attitudes in your heart. You don't have what you want. That's envy that's going on there. So we need to be aware of the destruction of envy. And here's one other thing about it, is that there is a cure for envy. There's a cure for it. King Saul never found it. He never found it at all. In the closing years of his life, he was a miserable, lonely, always living in some state of fear or insecurity or anger and rage. And in fact, when you read his story, you see that frequently he was a demon-oppressed man. And all because of his attitude. King Saul let his envy get the best of him so bad, even that you can see how demons even took up residence around him. I don't know if the Bible says he was possessed necessarily. We'll leave that for scholars, but you know what? They were at least hanging around and making a regular appearance in his life and making him miserable. But the good news is that the Bible tells us that there's a cure for envy. But let me just tell you this, it's not a pill. It's not a pill. When we were saying this in Tuesday night Bible study recently. We were going through the book of Mark, and one of the things we said is that what's true back 2,000 years ago is still true today when it comes to doctors. I only go to a doctor, and I think unless you're a hypochondriac, which is such a minute number of us, but I only go to the doctor. You only go to the doctor when you can't get well on your own. That's when I go to the doctor. You're sick for days, like, I'll get better. Finally, all right, I ain't getting better. Got to go to the doctor, whatever, or something more severe happens. But we go to the doctor when we know we can't get better on our own. And if you got an illness that there's a medication for, you get prescribed a pill. And then the recovery part can generally be speaking is like this. Your responsibility for the recovery part now is morning, noon, and before you go to bed, you take a pill. That's the extent of your work when it comes to a physical illness that goes on. The pill, when you take the pill's doing all the work. And but your job, just take it and pop it down. That's the extent of your work. Listen, when it comes to the cure that God has for us in so many things in our life, it is not just taking a pill. There are things that we are expected of us, and often it gets worded in this way: obedience. Back to the doctor, the pill thing, we might call it following doctor's orders here. But there's obedience to it here. And let me just give you another example. The extent of the pill of my work is popping the pill. I said that there. But I realize that I have something in me that is displeasing to God, and so I need to change. But if all I do is pray, I'm not doing much more than just taking the pill and saying, well, God, you've got to fix the problem. But God says, we should pray, but then there's the obedience part. And that's our part of the recovery also. We tell an addict to pray and to stop buying alcohol or going to bars. We tell the person with a porn problem, pray, and you need to get rid of your internet for a while. We tell the person with a spending problem, pray, and cut up your credit cards, figure out a budget, and stick to it. There's always a part that we are responsible for here. So for us, our part in the cure for envy is obedience. And it's obedience to these things here. And there's 3 things that are a cure for it here. And I'm just going to list them like this. It's get rid of, replace, and remember. Get rid of, replace, remember. Now, Paul spoke to new Christians in Ephesus, and he gave them this command. And the command was this, in Ephesians 4:31 and 32. He says, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. This is the get rid of part that's going on here. That's the command. We're to actively take part in cleaning our house that we have here. And you may think that there's no mention. I don't see the word envy up there. Let me ask you something. You let envy grow in you, you're going to have every one of these things going on. If envy is alive and present in your heart, if the bacteria of envy is going on in your life, you got every one of these symptoms that are going on in your life here. And he's saying, get rid of them. That meaning you got to take a conscious effort. You know what? On the slander part, I'm keeping my mouth shut about negative things I say about that person. About, the bitterness. I'm dropping it. I'm letting the bitterness go here. Now, and all that. And on with the other ones too here. But I'm so into it, I'm turning pages before I get to stuff. Every one of these things that we get rid of here, these are the byproducts of envy here. These things, I wrote this down here. Like I said a moment ago, these are the byproducts of envy. You're going to have, these are the symptoms here. How can you have a cold and never have a runny nose? If the runny nose is there, you got a cold. How can a kid have chicken pox and not have any spots on them whatsoever there? And how can a person be envious and not have bitterness in their life? If you have bitterness in your life, there's probably some envy going on there. How can an envious person not have moments of rage? You may be smart and you may be good and you keep them to yourself and that's only behind closed doors, but even there's moments of rage. Or, when we have envy of someone, we always have something slanderous to say about that person. Someone might say, oh, did you see how nice he was treating his mother there? I say, yeah, probably just doing it so he stays in the inheritance. That's the envy and the slander that's coming out there. Envy has so many symptoms of bad attitudes that we need to directly confront them and get rid of them. But you notice here that the Bible has a specific process for it. We need to get rid of these attitudes and behaviors and replace them. Remember, it was get rid of, replace. That's one of the things there. And we need to replace them with better things. Get rid of and replace. That's the Bible's directions for our obedience. Replace all those bad, negative attitudes. Being kind and compassionate. But it also recognizes, see here, be kind and compassionate to one another. Forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Forgiving each other can happen in 2 ways. sometimes you need to go to the person. And then other times, if it's just something that's totally been going on in your heart, and if you actually pause and thought about, like, they have no idea how envious I am of them. They have no idea. You know, you do not need to go to them. I've experienced a couple times as a pastor where someone's come to me, Pastor, I just want you to know I've forgiven you. Well, really, for what? And they may say, like, well, I had no idea that was going on. And it wasn't, and in some cases like that, it was all something made up, and they received something and they twisted it, and they're coming and telling me that. But like, there's time, you don't need to go to somebody. You don't need to tell them that. If it's all been your battle, you don't need to go to them. In fact, sometimes it doesn't help anything with that. But it also recognizes that we need a new energy behind the kindness and compassion that we're commanded now to have. So we need a new energy, because there's a lot of energy behind bitterness and rage and anger. There's a lot that's going on there. If I'm just going to get rid of it, there's a vacuum there. That's why we need to replace it. But we need a new energy, and the energy comes in kindness and compassion, but also this, and forgiving each other. And here's the energy. Just as in Christ, God forgave you. Is to pause and think, how much has God had to forgive me for the things I've done to him? How much do the things I've done to hurt him, how much do they compare to anything that anyone has done to me? And they don't. They don't. The truth of the matter is somebody can do the worst things to me, and compared to what I've done to God, it still doesn't compare. I don't want people to do bad things to me, and I don't want God or anyone to do bad things to you. I certainly don't. But I recognize this. The Bible makes it very plain and very clear that the hurts and the sins that I've done to God far outrank what anyone has done to me. And when I have bitterness and unforgiveness in my heart towards somebody, I am ranking their offenses to me higher than my offenses to God. It's almost like I'm saying, yeah, I know I hurt your feelings, God, but it ain't nothing like this. You know, Jesus dying on the cross, yeah, that was small potatoes, dealing with my sins compared to, wow, we need, to deal with this person's sins. Nobody's sins outranks yours. Nobody's sins against you outranks yours to God. And when we remember that, it humbles us. When we remember that goes a long ways in being the new energy that helps us realize, okay, I can find space to forgive. I can find space to not be saying the nasty things I say about that person. I can find space not to have the bitterness in my heart, the resentment in my heart that they have something that isn't fair that I don't have. I can find space for that. Get rid of, replace, remember what Christ has done for you. In fact, if I could just add two very quick little add-ons to that, I would say we also need to learn contentedness, because that's the other thing. When you're envious, you're not content with where you're at. You're not content with what you have. You need something more. You've determined that you need something more to be content. But we need to learn to be content. There's a fascinating little story in the Bible where when John the Baptist came along, he had a several month, a year or two stretch where he was the rock star of Israel. I mean, he was the it guy. He was on the front of all the papers. He was on all the radio shows, all the things about him there. And, his TikToks, they were rating the highest. They were trending. All those things there. He was the it guy. But the thing is he knew exactly who he was. He knew exactly who God had called him to be. He was the opening act for Jesus. He was the one to prime the pump and get people ready, because here comes Jesus. And that's exactly what happened. And there came Jesus. And the tide turned. And these huge crowds that followed John, the numbers started going down. And the huge crowds started following Jesus. And some people, and even his disciples, came to him once like, hey, does this bother you? like you're not getting the numbers, you're not getting the clicks, you're not getting the likes that you used to get here. And now Jesus, does that bother you? And John said this. He said, to this John replied, a person can receive only what is given to them from heaven. The crowds I had, God gave me the crowds. The numbers I was getting, God gave me the numbers. The reason I'm not getting as many numbers now is God isn't giving me the numbers. God isn't giving me the crowds. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I'll keep doing it, and he did for a stretch until he got arrested and then executed. But he was content because he recognized, I have what I have because God's given it to me. Now I could see where for some, you might have something that, there might be something in your life like, I don't have that, and I can't think of any good reason why I don't. Seeing just recently a wife who's unable to conceive. Every fiber of her being, she wants to have a child of her own. And I don't want to judge her, I'm a guy, but her argument is like, I can't think of any good reason why I can't have children. God, why aren't you giving me children? I cannot answer that. And I don't want to be trite in the answer here, but the answer in the meantime is simply this. Whether it's her or us, we have to be content with what God has given us. We have to say, okay, God, this is what you've given me. These are the cards I've been dealt. This is what I got. I'm human. Kind of wish I had a couple more cards in that area, but I don't. I'm going to take the cards you've given me and do something great with them. I'm going to do all I can with it. I wish I had more, but I don't. And learn to be content. John, he didn't get baited into, you should be envious of those numbers he's getting. No, I can only have what God's given me. And then the other thing I would say is to rejoice. Not just in your situation, but in other people's situations. Paul said this in Romans 12:15. He says, rejoice with those who rejoice. That person who you're envious of, who's got something that you don't have, that you wish you had too, and you don't like them for having it. And then guess what? Then they get some more. Like, hey, guess what? Look, I got some more. And before you'd be like, shut up. But the Bible says to rejoice with those who rejoice. To celebrate with them. And that we should, celebrate with them. Here's what happens with it. You guard your heart. You are inoculating your heart from the toxins of bitterness when you rejoice with those who rejoice. What should we do of the person who is envious of us? One last question here. Maybe you realize there's somebody who's envious of you. You should love them. You should love them a lot. Maybe if it fits, make it weird. On loving them a lot. Rejoice with them over every great thing that happens in their life. Celebrate. I'll tell you what, one of the most meaningful things that's ever happened to me, and every now and then it happens to me. It's happened a handful of times in life. But one of the most meaningful things that's happened to me is when somebody, and we'll just stick to my circle for this example here. My circle is pastors and ministry. And when something good happens to me, and there's a pastor who they've got way more than I've got in all sorts of levels. They're smarter, their church is bigger, on and on and on. And they see this good thing happen, and they see this good thing happen to me, and they rejoice with me. And it's real, and it's genuine. Because at first, it's human. You're kind of like, are you faking this? Are you just kind of doing the good Christian thing? Or is this real in your heart? And you start realizing it's real in their heart. They're rejoicing with me. When someone who has more than me has genuine joy for any good thing that happens to me, any success, and like, man, that is awesome. That is so great. That is so cool what happened for you there. Man, good for you. I tell you what, I don't know how to classify those compliments, but they do get classified higher. When the person who has more is excited about what good happens to me, listen, when somebody's envious of you, just Go all out in rejoicing with them. Just be happy with them. And that's a great way of inoculating the bitterness that can be going on in there. But we want to be aware of all these things. We want to be aware of the bait of envy. We want to be aware of the destruction of envy. It will creep over into every other relationship in our lives. And we want to know the cure too. We want to get rid of, we want to replace, and we want to remember what Jesus has done for us in all these things. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father,